So somebody's just made a comment in the chat box about the shame around this. In my experience, shame is a huge component in this work across the board, whether we're looking at addiction or trauma or deficiency stories. Shame seems to be in part of the architecture of the self, almost. So however we do, whatever we do, we're going to meet it at some point or another. And I think it's important to recognise that it is a very difficult thing to feel. You know, it's a difficult thing to be with shame. But the more we do that, the more capacity we build within ourselves to be able to be with it. And the more we're with it, the more we can make choices without shaming ourselves. So when we recognise that we're not ready, we can do that in a way that isn't shaming. Does anybody else have anything to say about shame? Because it seems to me a really important part of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that we go through great lengths to pretend and hide ourselves from that shame, because it almost is like there's a survivability that comes up, I think, with it. Like, we're just not going to make it through if we allow ourselves to feel the intensity of that. And there can be self-loathing in there with it, and all sorts of things that no one would really choose to spend their time with unless they are just up against a wall and tired of it. And then shame becomes something that you over time discover is also safe to explore and feel and meet. And it's really a discovery. You know, it's just like all of this. Colm was saying something about trust, and it's not something that necessarily happens from the mind. Or readiness isn't necessarily something that happens from the mind, but it's, and shame too isn't met at the level of the mind. It's discovered and moved toward and into in a very sweet and organic way that we can't know ahead of time. And so when that discovery happens, it happens, you know. And I love what you said, Fiona, about that kindness, that if we can bring in any amount of kindness with it. And again, this is for me where it became so crucial to have somebody supporting me, because they brought in the kindness that I did not have. I did not have any kindness with regard to my shame. I only had judgment. So somebody else introduced my system to kindness and compassion with regard to that. And the discoveries then just really unfolded from there. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Helena, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I noticed, I'm also thinking about the readiness thing. For me, there's the feeling of shame very much wrapped around my whole addiction process. I'm very, very clear on that. And what I found myself living with was a sense of bandwidth. It's like, how much of me can I tolerate being aware of today, and for how long? And so then there'd be, okay, this is it. I can't take any more of me right now, so I need to shut down. TV, chocolate was just a routine every day for at least an hour or two at different points. So there was that sense of just having to hide from the experience of me. But I'd also like just to say something about readiness, that in tackling what felt like a really tough addiction for me with chocolate, it sounds ridiculous, but it was really the hardest one I've ever tried to work with, and it's the longest. There were 2 factors. One was, it took me a long time for it to suddenly occur to me that maybe I could allow myself to feel bad. And that was such a shocking idea that I had to dance around it for days and days and days, until I finally thought that maybe I would try it and see if I could actually allow it. And I had this image of myself being like a mother who was so overwhelmed that she couldn't bear that her toddler was screaming again. I saw that that's what I'm like with addiction. It's like, as soon as that protest comes up from that part of me, I stuff it in. I stuff in the chocolate. I stuff in something. it made me wonder what my mothering was like when I was a child, you know, whether there was that dynamic going on. So that was it was a really powerful process to be kind and allow myself to not move forward and not push myself into trying to make myself rest into the pain of it. And only when I was ready to start feeling that did I test it out to see if I could survive it and discover that I could. And that was really exciting. But the other thing I wanted to say, and this is perhaps a topic we haven't really touched into yet, was that there was a certain point when I had found myself able to rest over and over again, learn how to do that, as it were, into the need for chocolate. And then one day I woke up and thought, oh my God, am I giving this up? I mean, forever? I mean, is this it? And it was really scary. This feeling of, but I've had this here. It's been my scaffold for, I don't know, 50, 55 years. How can I walk into the future without it? And I realized it was a really big deal. This idea that, you know, just the concept that I was going to give this thing up totally, which seemed to be what was happening. I think that's a really interesting point, the sense of the familiarity of our addiction. It's been our comfort and constant companion for years. And we're going to walk away from that? Thank you.
Yeah, we don't really talk about ego death too much in Living Inquiries, but to me there's that language can kind of resonate at times. There is that some kind of a sense of a dying happening. That was my experience anyway, many different times in many different ways. And all that comes with that, yeah.
Yeah. Sumitra, did you want to come in here?
Yeah, I wanted to share something along the line of shame that's really transpired for me in using the Living Inquiries. I came to a point where I recognized real clearly that these two different voices in my head, one was shaking this finger saying, you should. And then I recognized the other side, you know, was more of this child that was rebelling and saying, oh no, I don't want to. You know, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do whatever I darn well please. And the more I looked at it, the more amazed I was to realize that these two voices have been in my mind since I was a child. And all of a sudden, I actually saw this big red dragon raise up inside of me, and it just screamed, F, should. And I think it was the first time I ever said that bad word, right? And that was, to me, was a bad word before then. Anyway, it was just like my whole being rose up and said, I won't have this anymore. And since that day, those two voices have really quieted, and I've come to see how in our culture especially, I think we don't have great rituals or ways to actually accept becoming an adult. You know, and as children, it's natural that we're given all these shoulds and we form this conscience, you know, that tells us from these various authorities what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to react and be in our world. And at some point, I would have appreciated some kind of ritual within my family or my community, you know, where I was actually allowed to just grow up and become an adult, you know, and given tools or given even awareness, you know, that it was time to do that. It was time to accept responsibility for what was going on with me. And I no longer needed to listen, you know, it's time to put those shoulds aside. So that's been really wonderful for me in terms of shame and of the whole idea, the whole sense of shame really falling away. Giving myself permission to not listen to the shoulds anymore, to stand up and say, you know, I'm a grown-up, I'm going to do what I want. And then to see, what do I really want? Thank you.
Thanks, Sumitra.